Hello and welcome to lesson 55 of the Learning Guitar series. In this particular lesson, we're going to discuss diminished chords, scales and arpeggios, and this is going to be part one of a series of lessons dedicated to diminished. What's interesting about diminished, as you will see today and in the near future, is they are symmetrical in nature and how they can be the starting point for further studies in inversions. So although it might be a chord that then in pop music might not get used that very often, it's important that we study diminished and understand the theory behind them, besides the technicality of it, because a lot of interesting things will come out of that, which instead will apply to major, minor, etc. Another note of consideration, as you will see from the diagrams I created for you, is so far we looked at general guitar system, let's say the cage system, for example, where we looked at things across the neck subdivided in 5 shapes. And also when we studied major modes, we also looked into the possibility of playing 3 notes per strings kind of pattern, especially when it applies to scales. And so we had 7 positions. When it comes to diminished, we're going to kind of introduce a further approach in the way we subdivide the neck. And we're looking basically at 4, let's say 4 positions. You'll see in a second what I mean by that. Before we even start looking at the exercises I created for you, let's have a look at the theory behind diminished, because it's quite important to understand this. So, first of all, where do diminished chords come from? Well, they come from a dominant 7 family. Dominant 7 chords, we know the intervals are 1, 3, 5, flat 7. And basically diminished is just we're diminishing all the intervals except the root note. So the third becomes a flat 3, the fifth becomes a flat 5, and the flat 7 becomes, academically speaking, a double flat 7. Bear in mind that double flat 7 and the sixth are actually the same note. And here is one possibility, like this is a diminished chord, one of the many possible shapes of it. And here I wrote the same thing, but actually I'm highlighting the notes. Why is this important? Well, for 2 reasons. First of all, this is a symmetrical chord. What I mean by that is if I write the same shape a tone and a half up from the root note, so like say the first inversion of it, as you can see, the intervals stays the same, but also the chord shape stays the same. Actually, let me make this white so it doesn't create confusion. And if I continue a tone and a half up, here you go. Same shape. Of course, a redistribution of the interval. The root note was here, now is here, now is here, but it's still flat 3, double flat 7, and flat 5. And again, if I go to fret 12, same chord shape, and here you have basically 3 inversions of the same chord, maintaining the same kind of finger pattern. So first of all, that's an important consideration. That's why we define this as moving symmetrically on the neck. Obviously, after this double flat 7, we're back to here, right? And is the idea that we have 4, let's say, shapes instead of the 5 shapes of the cage system, or again 3 notes per string, 7 shapes. Also, what's not considering is, let's do this with notes as opposed to intervals. The first inversion, let's change this into notes. As I move them around, well, obviously, as above, we're basically just remesculating the intervals. Let me just complete the diagram so you'll see where this is going. Now, what I want you to pay attention to is what happens the moment I change the root note. So I have a chord made of 4 notes, 1, flat 3, flat 5, double flat 7. Do remember the intervals, okay? 1, flat 3, double 5, flat 5, double flat 7. Let me change the root note. Instead of being G, so instead of being G, the root note, I'm going to make E, this note here, the root note. Now, as you can see, of course, the root notes all across the neck have changed, fair enough, but 1, flat 3, flat 5, double flat 7, not the intervals. So this was not just G diminished. Turns out is also E diminished. Again, let's check what happens if I actually make B flat the root note of this chord. Once again, flat 3, flat 5, double flat 7. So this is not only G diminished, this is also E diminished, and it's also B flat diminished. Let's keep going. Let's actually make D flat the root note. So again, the intervals is actually the same the moment I make D flat the root note. What this means is that a diminished chord, so this for example, is not only G diminished, but is also E diminished, is also D flat diminished, is also B flat diminished. And if that applies to the chord, obviously it applies also to arpeggios and scale. And that also means that within 1, 2, 3 frets, okay, 4 frets actually, I have all 12 keys when it comes to diminished chords. Not only because of their symmetrical nature, so the fact that basically the inversions of a diminished chord actually presents themselves with the same shape. The same thing is going to happen to scale and arpeggios, which is kind of simplifying our, let's say, technical studies. And the reason for that is when we've done the major modes, we had to learn, 5 shapes of scales. So it's 5 different type of finger patterns. Diminished, no, it's going to be 4 shapes related to the 4 chords, but finger-wise is actually the same. So if we further look at what happens in terms of 4 keys, what we end up noticing, let me make G the root note in this case. Well, actually, it doesn't really matter. So within these 4 frets, you have basically all 12 keys of diminished scales and arpeggios. Now, when it comes to the intervals of the actual scale, what we're looking at, let me make this the root note once again. I'm going to write this in the key of G, but as I said, this is the key of G, is also the key of E, is also the key of B flat, is also the key of D flat. The scale itself is 1, 2, flat 3, 4, flat 5, flat 6, double flat 7, major 7, back to root note, 2, flat 3, 4, flat 5, flat 6, double flat 7, major 7, root note, 2, flat 3, and if you want, you can add a major 7 here, okay? When it comes to the vertical structure for the arpeggio, obviously, like the 2 becomes a 9, the 4th becomes an 11. Here you go. And then you actually have a major 7, which means this chord can be played as a chord containing both the 6 and the major 7. I hope that like the theory behind this is kind of clear enough. Once we look at the exercises that I put together, it's going to be even more clear. Let's have a look at what's going on exercise-wise. So I created 2 PDFs that goes with this lesson. The first one, here you have some diminished chords and obviously all the inversions. In this case, I actually wrote the 6th, so you get used to the idea that, double flat 7 and 6 is the same note. Fair enough. When we've done the major modes, every time there was a 6th in the chord, we called it a 6th. As I said, double flat 7, it's a correct definition. It's absolutely the perfect definition of it when it comes to diminished chords, for the reason that we say it like we are diminishing a dominant 7 chord. Nevertheless, I left it as a 6th here. I mean, technically, academically, maybe not correct, but it still kind of makes sense. Here, these are different string groups, so different ways to play the same chords. Here is using the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd and 4th string. Here it's 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Different combination of different ways of playing the same chords, and of course the inversion. And obviously the inversions are the same finger shape, moving up in tone and half, or vice versa, moving down. Here is like the arpeggios, basic arpeggios you can play. And so it's 1, flat 3, double flat 5, 6, 1, flat 3, etc. And as you can see, the same thing happens there. You're basically learning one particular pattern and simply multiplying it, in moving it symmetrically in tone and halves. Also to that, we can add the fact that, as I'll show you on the guitar in a second, as an arpeggio can also move diagonally on the guitar. So here is the first arpeggios, and as you move up in tone and half, as you can see, it moves symmetrically. Here what you have is the scale, and this is part one, because in this case we're studying a diminished scale, which is called all half, and this applies to diminished chord. So if you see a diminished chord on a particular song, this is a scale that could go with it. And the reason it's called all half is because the interval starting from the root does whole tone, half tone, whole tone, half tone, whole tone, half tone. So it's always a sequence of whole tone, half tone, whole tone. If I was to write it horizontally, actually let me write it horizontally so you see exactly what I mean. If I was to write the same scale horizontally, it would go whole tone, half tone, whole tone, half tone, whole tone, half tone, etc., etc., etc. Actually, I can make this many more frets. Whole tone, half tone, whole tone, half tone, whole tone. So the reason we call it all half is we are starting from the root note. We're going to go whole tone, half tone, whole tone, half tone. And basically what you see here is the vertical execution of the scale. Once again, the finger patterns of this scale are the same finger pattern of this scale, which are the same finger pattern of this scale, which are the same finger patterns of this scale. It's just moving in tone and halves. And this is the diagonal execution. Again, as you can see, it's very symmetrical. You have whole tone, half tone, whole tone. Then you move to the next string and you're actually executing the same pattern. And then you go to the next string and you execute the same pattern, same pattern, same pattern. The only difference is the passage in between the G string and the B string, instead of being a semitone, is actually an entire tone from the 4th to the 7th, simply because of the way the guitar is tuned, where the B string is tuned the semitone down. Once again, two patterns, that's why I wrote them like in black and in white, so you can see you are literally covering the entire neck of the guitar. The second PDF I created is the exercises you can do. Instead of being in a diagram form, is actually in a PDF form. And I'm going to show them to you one by one. Again, what's important to understand in terms of practice this thing, and as I said, this is part one. There's going to be more exercises. These are like kind of a good starting point, a good solid point to start from. You want to practice, as usual, first, let's say we're going to look at a scale, and you literally want to practice it going down in semitones so that you create a muscle memory. So you're not necessarily thinking of a specific key, although if you tell yourself what you're playing, again, you're kind of training your photographic memory too at the same time. But as I said, bear in mind that when you're playing a diminished chord or a diminished scale, it actually belongs to 4 keys at the same time. But in terms of practicing, what I mean by moving it in semitone, I mean this. So let's take a diminished scale. We're going to play the vertical version of it. And you have this. That's what I mean by moving it in semitone. So once let's say you ascend with it, you descend with it, and then you move everything up a semitone, and now it's basically A flat diminished. Etc., etc., etc. Now, of course, if I decided to, instead of moving up a semitone, if I was to move up in tone and half, basically, I'm playing the same scale. Like so if I decided this was the key of G, as opposed to E, B flat, or D flat. Hopefully, it's that clear by now. I hope it makes sense. So I'm going to go through. I'm going to show you first of all what's in terms of exercises, and then I'm literally going to show them to you on the guitar, so you have an idea what I mean by that. As I said, I wrote the exercises in the key of G. You want to move them in semitone. Okay? It was just I only wrote it like as a loop, but definitely you want to move it in semitone. You don't want to practice everything just in the key of G. Let's have a look. So the first exercise is literally what I just did. So it's basically the scale played in a vertical manner. And then there is the scale played in a horizontal manner. Basically these two dots, the start, repeat, and end the repeat, basically signify that's the end of an exercise. You just go here and you just keep repeating it. And of course you go in semitones up. This is the diagonal version. This is a group of three. So the scale played in group of three notes. This is a scale played in group of four notes. So as I say, a good starting point. As I say, like these are scale arpeggios exercises part 1. There's going to be more sophisticated exercise coming in the next lessons. These are the group of 3 applied to a diagonal version of the scale, and this is the group of 4 applied to the diagonal version of the scale. Now then we move to the arpeggios exercises. This is the arpeggio. This is the different fingerings for the same type of arpeggio. Again, I'm going to show you on the guitar. So let's call this, A and B if you want to, because this is the arpeggio, the diagonal version of the arpeggio. Now we have group of 3 applied to these fingerings, and this is group of 3 applied to these fingerings for the arpeggio. Group of 3 diagonal, obviously. A group of 4 applied to the A arpeggio, group of 4 applied to the B arpeggio, and group of 4 applied to the diagonal version. What I mean by the two fingerings, again, the arpeggio will move symmetrically. At the same time, I can play this arpeggio this way. And the part which is going to change is actually this. Maybe try and remember this finger number 4, finger number 2, finger number 1. And I'm sure you've heard this kind of pattern, especially like I heard a lot of Ingrid Malmsteen doing this kind of stuff, of course, with distortion and all that. Another pattern, and that would be the pattern B, is very, very similar. The only difference is here, instead of using, we're going this way. So basically I end up on an higher note, and also like the sweep picking pattern becomes this, as opposed to, I don't know, this is so common. Anyway, it's in there. So that's what it means from the two different kind of finger patterns. So let's have a look. I'm going to go through the various exercises so you see it at least once. As I say, don't forget to move it up in semitone so you get familiar. It's the muscle memory you want to create. Don't practice too fast. I mean, a reasonable speed on metronome. I'm not going to use one because I actually don't have one near me, but a speed on metronome which, when you're playing basically perfectly. So if it is literally, that's good. For as long as you play correctly, it's good. As I said, you're training your muscles. And once your muscles kind of can execute that without really thinking too much, that's when you're ready to speed that up. So let's look at the exercises. I hope it makes sense. And this is enough for first introduction into Diminished. As I said, this is part one. There is going to be definitely more. And as I said, pay particular attention in studying the scales, this arpeggio, and also the chords, obviously. Because a lot of other very interesting stuff will come out of that. I think the occasion, actually, I should have done it at the beginning of the video, but I forgot. Happy New Year, everybody. And I wish you all a fantastic 2023, obviously. In particular, I would like to thank the people who are supporting this project on Patreon, without whom this would not be happening at this point. I hope more people will get involved. And as usual, if you have any questions or suggestion, whatever thought you might have, feel free to send me a message on Patreon, especially if something that maybe is not clear enough. I'm more than happy to help you out. And of course, you can leave a comment also, like on the YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe to it if you haven't done so, and share this stuff if you can. I mean, not a lot of marketing goes on into this thing. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and I'll see you for the next lesson. Bye.